In the third and final presidential debate, there was a question that was posed to the candidates which asked whether the Constitution should be upheld as the Founding Fathers had intended them to be, or if it should be a little more flexible and maybe like modified a little bit as society grows and changes. So immediately my mind went to the Catholic doctrine and how doctrine has been around and has remained unchanged since it was firmly established. So, 1,500 years that it's actually been in stone and teaching what it's taught. And then when I look at the Catholic faith, sure, we've had bad popes. We've had popes that have promoted murder, orgies, torture, all these different things, but at no point did any of them change the doctrine to actually be able to justify what it was that they were doing. So as far as this whole law and order piece goes, people hate on people that look at the doctrine and they say, oh, well, what about the Pharisees? There were still good Pharisees, Nicodemus was one of them. But getting back to the Constitution and this whole idea of, upholding it how the founding fathers meant. Our country has been built on capitalism. We've been around for 238 years, which the average lifespan of the average civilization is 200 years. So we've surpassed that average. And if we aren't careful about really, we look at the Catholic faith and how long they've lasted. If we really want to last and sustain the society, we need to be looking at what the Founding Fathers actually intended for the country and continue to live by that. There's a quote here. It's by St. Irenaeus. It was stated in 290 AD, so after Christ died. And he said, "Why then did the Lord not form the covenant for the patriarchs? Because the law was not established for righteous men, but the righteous patriarchs had the meaning of the Decalogue written in their hearts and souls. That is, they loved the God who made them and did no injury to their neighbor. There was therefore no occasion for them to be cautioned by prohibitory commandments, because they had the righteousness of the law in themselves. But when this righteousness and love of God had passed into oblivion and became extinct in Egypt, God did give commandments." So essentially what this is saying is that the law isn't for the people that wouldn't already not do something. Like, I wouldn't have an abortion, so that law banning abortions isn't something that is necessarily made for me. It's for the people that would commit that sin, that would actually go forward and, as Donald Trump stated, rip that baby from the womb. I had a couple different interesting arguments about this week with a couple different people. One person stated they'd rather kill themselves than have a baby. Another person, I had shared an article about what the late-term abortion looked like, and he got mad because the site said that it was about truth and not a liberal media, and I don't know what the aversion to actually accepting. I almost want to ask those people to please post a photo of a post-aborted baby and put, I am okay with this. So actually accepting what something is and looking at it as, okay, we have freedoms. Abe Lincoln has that quote that says, if we are destroyed, it won't be from the outside in, if we lose our freedoms, it'll be from the inside out. With freedom comes consequence, though. We can have freedoms to, if somebody wants to go murder somebody, I have the freedom to make my choice. But there's a consequence. That's what the law is for. We have speed limits on the road to protect children whose balls run into the middle of the street, or, to prevent car accidents. And we have stoplights, and we have law and order on the streets for that particular reason. The law is for protection, for the dignity of life, and actually upholding that and protecting us as civilians to sustain our civilization. It's interesting because even St. Clement of Alexandria in 195 AD, in the Roman law, in the case of a pregnant woman, it says if a pregnant woman is condemned to death, the Romans do not allow her to undergo punishment until she has delivered. So in the case of abortion, and when we look at the Supreme Court and the Supreme Court justices that our new president is going to be having to appoint, we need to be respecting this life that is within people. And, our country's found on capitalism. And, lawlessness is not something that is going to promote our country. It's not going to promote unity. It's not going to promote, furthering of anything. We will, I hate to say that I probably have to support Trump, because I feel like neither candidate is really fully defendable. I think is the best way to put it. I mean, Trump's demeanor is not exactly my favorite, but at the same time, Hillary Clinton's corruption is definitely not my favorite. So looking at her past, and I mean, Obama ran, everyone was like, oh, he's the Antichrist, and I was like, oh no, Joe Biden's the Antichrist, and it's like, I look at Hillary Clinton, and it's like, oh, could she be, or is Kane, since he's like speaking out against Catholics, saying, oh, they're gonna change their doctrine to accept gay marriage. It's like, no, we're not. Our doctrine cannot change, and that's the basis of how we've sustained this long. Like, that's the whole thing, is that it can't just change. That's what the church believes. We rely on our founding fathers for everything, and we don't morph and flex and change our doctrine depending on society. Period. It will not happen. So cut the crap, Kane. It's not going. So anyway, but looking at the lawlessness, the Antichrist in the Bible is described as, making a promise and not following through, and making a promise and not following through. And so when we look at Clinton and how she kind of like denies things that she supported, and Trump has that whole thing with Iraq, whether he supported the war or not, and all of these different things, like there's just so much gossip going on and so much in the media that this election is crazy. But at the end of the day, it comes down to upholding the Constitution, understanding that our founding fathers in the US were Christians. Okay, our country was founded on capitalism, and Trump was probably not okay stating what he was going to do if Clinton won, because he's probably going to export his companies. He's going to start doing jobs overseas, because guess what? Tax rates are going to be way cheaper. My dad is a small business owner. He hates the idea. Entrepreneurs are not going to want to go and start up their new businesses because, hey, if I make over 250 grand, I'm going to have to pay like half of it back anyway, so why bother? Like, I'll just go get a job and make whatever I make and go do that. So it's definitely a big election, especially with the Supreme Court justices. Like, this is not going to be just the next 4 years. This is the next 30 years of our country. So I definitely want to encourage you guys. Trump needs as many votes as he can right now. That's how it is. His policies are much more in line with the Catholic thought. Yes, freedom to all. I think that everybody has a right to make their own choices. I agree with what Trump said about sending it back to the state, and I think that that also gives us as civilians the opportunity to choose which state we want to live in, and say, well, I don't want to live in a state, and I don't want to pay state taxes to a state that funds Planned Parenthood in that particular state. And so that can choose. It's somewhat dividing. Again, you look at the Civil War, how it was the North and the South, but hopefully we're still able to get along enough, but at the same time understanding that it is down to the states to make those choices, and to have a government dictated everyone must abide by this rule is not the freedom that our founding fathers had for us, and it's not the freedom that I want to live in today. But I'm not planning on fleeing the country if Clinton wins, but at the same time it will definitely affect how I choose to live my life and different decisions I may make, whether it's homeschooling my kids versus sending them to a private school or a public school. It will drastically change our society. So I pray, and I encourage you to pray for this election, for everybody's hearts, just to kind of see past the crap that we're seeing in the media, and get out there and vote on November 8th, hopefully for Trump. And I hope you guys have a blessed Sunday. Thanks so much for listening, watching. I hope it was helpful, and I will see you in the comments, and I will see you again next week. God bless.